April 8, 1943. Luftwaffe Fighter Command Headquarters, Schleißheim, Germany. General Major Adolf Galland's fingers drummed against the intelligence report that had arrived from the Technical Air Armaments Office. The greatest fighter ace in the Luftwaffe, with 94 confirmed victories at that moment, read the American specifications with something between amusement and disbelief. "The Americans have produced another monster," he said to his assembled staff officers. "They call it the P-47 Thunderbolt. Gentlemen, listen to this. Empty weight, 4,900 kilograms. Our Bf-109 weighs 2,200. This American fighter weighs more than a U-88 bomber." Through the windows of the operations room, spring sunlight glinted off the propellers of Messerschmitt Bf-109Gs lined up on the airfield. These aircraft, sleek, nimble, deadly, had dominated European skies since 1940. British Spitfires, Soviet Yaks, American P-40s and P-38s all had been bested by Luftwaffe pilots flying the 109 and its stablemate, the FW-190. Major Gunter Rahl, then with 200 victories, examined a grainy reconnaissance photograph of a P-47 on an English airfield. "It looks like someone attached wings to an oil drum," he observed. "The Americans build fighters the way they build everything. Too heavy, too complicated, too expensive. Another failure waiting to happen." What none of them knew, what the entire Luftwaffe command structure failed to comprehend, was that in exactly 47 days, this oil drum with wings would begin the systematic destruction of German fighter superiority over Western Europe. The P-47 Thunderbolt would fly more than 546,000 combat sorties, destroy 11,874 enemy aircraft, 7,067 in the air, 4,807 on the ground, and achieve a kill-to-loss ratio of 4.6 to 1 in air combat, rising to 7 to 1 when flown by experienced units. It would prove so indestructible that it had the lowest loss rate of any American fighter, 1 aircraft lost per 1,000 sorties. But more devastating than the statistics was the psychological impact. Within 18 months, Luftwaffe pilots would refuse to engage formations of P-47s unless they had overwhelming numerical superiority. German after-action reports would describe encounters with language previously reserved for natural disasters: terrifying, unstoppable, like fighting a machine. The mathematics of aerial warfare over Europe were about to be rewritten by an aircraft that violated every principle of fighter design the Germans had perfected. And the Luftwaffe's arrogant confidence in April 1943 would transform into desperate terror by the summer of 1944.
The Luftwaffe's dismissal of the P-47 wasn't born from ignorance. It was rooted in 3 years of unprecedented victories. From 1939 to 1942, German fighter pilots had achieved kill ratios that seemed to confirm the superiority of their design philosophy and tactical doctrine. In the Battle of France, the Luftwaffe lost 299 aircraft while destroying over 1,400 Allied planes. During the Battle of Britain, despite the eventual strategic defeat, German fighters maintained favorable kill ratios against RAF Spitfires and Hurricanes. On the Eastern Front, individual German aces were racking up victory totals that defied belief. Erich Hartmann would eventually reach 352 victories, Gerhard Barkhorn 301, and Günther Rahl 275. The Messerschmitt B-109, in its various iterations, from the E model through the G model, represented the culmination of German fighter philosophy. It was light, 2,700 kilograms loaded, maneuverable, turn radius of 236 meters at optimal speed, heavily armed, 1 20mm cannon, 2 13mm machine guns, and fast, 640 kilometers per hour at altitude. The Focke-Wulf FW-190, introduced in 1941, had stunned the RAF with its performance. Heavier than the B-109, at 3,900 kilograms loaded, it combined the maneuverability of the 109 with devastating firepower: 4 20mm cannons and 2 13mm machine guns. British pilots who encountered it initially thought the Germans had deployed a new secret weapon. Oberleutnant Otto Stamberger, flying with JG-26, described the FW-190's dominance in his diary. The RAFs could outturn them, outdive them, outclimb them, and our armament could destroy them with a single burst. Some British pilots were bailing out before we even opened fire. Against this background of success, the American P-47 specifications seemed laughable. The first detailed intelligence on the P-47 reached Luftwaffe command through multiple channels in early 1943. Neutral Swiss observers, reconnaissance photographs of English airfields, and interrogations of shot-down American bomber crews who had seen the new fighter. The specifications compiled by the Technisches Amt, or Technical Office of the RLM, Reich Air Ministry, painted a picture of American excess taken to absurd extremes. Loaded weight, 7,938 kilograms, 17,500 pounds. Wing area, 27.87 square meters, 300 square feet. Engine, Pratt & Whitney R2800, double wasp, 18-cylinder radial, 2,000 horsepower. Armament, 8.50 caliber machine guns with 3,400 rounds total. Fuel capacity, 1,155 liters, 305 gallons with internal and external tanks. Armor, 95 kilograms of plate protecting pilot, engine, and oil system. Self-sealing tanks, all fuel tanks. Maximum speed, 697 kilometers per hour at 9,100 meters. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, a 176 Victory Ace commanding JG-77, wrote in his assessment for Fighter Command, "This aircraft represents American industrial philosophy applied to fighter design. The belief that problems can be solved by adding weight, horsepower, and firepower. The P-47's wing loading of 284 kilograms per square meter makes it a truck, not a fighter. Our Bf-109G has a wing loading of 192 kilograms per square meter. In combat, this American machine will be helpless." The Germans' analysis seemed mathematically sound. The Bf-109G could turn inside the P-47 with ease. The FW-190 could outroll it. Both German fighters were smaller, harder to spot, and more agile. Experienced Luftwaffe pilots, many with 50-plus victories, couldn't imagine losing to such a ponderous opponent. Major Heinz Baer, then with 159 victories, summed up the prevailing attitude. Let them come. Their P-47s will be target practice. Heavy targets, easy to hit. Oberfeldwebel Hans Ehlers of IIJG-1 was flying top cover for a staffel of Bf-109 G6s when he spotted them, 8 dark shapes at 7,000 meters heading toward the German coast. His first assumption was medium bombers. The silhouettes were too large, too heavy-looking to be fighters. Abdong, bomber formation heading 090, Angels 23,000, he radioed. Then one of them turned, presenting a profile view, and Ehlers felt his stomach tighten. Single engine, single seat, but massive, easily twice the size of his Messerschmitt. Correction! American fighters, P-47 types, engage! The tactical situation seemed ideal for the Germans. They held altitude advantage, 7,300 meters versus 7,000, sun position, and numerical superiority, 12 Bf-109s versus 8 P-47s. The Americans were deep over enemy territory, far from home, probably low on fuel. Ehlers rolled into a diving attack, his wingmen close beside him. Standard tactics: use the altitude advantage to build speed, make a high-speed pass, then zoom climb back to altitude before the enemy could react. The heavy P-47s would never be able to follow the nimble Messerschmitts through the vertical maneuvers. At 400 meters range, Ehlers opened fire with his 20mm cannon and 13mm machine guns. He saw hits sparking along the P-47's cowling and wing route. Any normal fighter would have been critically damaged. The P-47 barely seemed to notice. Then something happened that would be repeated in thousands of combat reports over the next 2 years. The P-47 didn't try to turn away. It didn't dive for safety. Instead, it went vertical. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine, delivering 2,000 horsepower from its 18 cylinders, 900 horsepower more than the Bf-109's Daimler-Benz DB605, drove the massive fighter upward at a climb rate that matched the Messerschmitts. Ehlers, committed to his zoom climb, suddenly found himself not escaping but racing a P-47 in a vertical climb. At 8,000 meters, the Messerschmitt's engine began to struggle. The DB605 was losing power in the thin air. The P-47's turbo-supercharger, giving it full power up to 9,000 meters, kept pulling. "Mein Gott," Ehlers whispered into his radio, "it's still climbing." The P-47 reached its apex first, performed a wingover, a maneuver that should have been impossible for an aircraft weighing 7,900 kilograms, and came down directly on Ehlers' tail. The American pilot opened fire at 300 meters, 8 Browning M2 machine guns, firing 800 rounds per minute each. A total of 6,400 rounds per minute created a stream of fire unlike anything Ehlers had experienced. Each 50 caliber bullet weighed 43 grams and traveled at 880 meters per second, delivering devastating kinetic energy. Ehlers' Messerschmitt was hit 23 times in 2.1 seconds. Cannon shells destroying the engine, the cockpit armor taking multiple hits, the right-wing fuel tank erupting in flames despite being self-sealing. He bailed out at 6,000 meters, his parachute opening just in time. His wingman, Unteroffizier Müller, was not as fortunate. His Bf-109 went down in flames, and Müller did not escape. Of the 12 Messerschmitts in that engagement, 3 were shot down, and 4 returned with battle damage. The 8 P-47s suffered no losses. One had 17 bullet holes, but landed safely in England. When Ehlers submitted his after-action report at the base hospital, his account was initially flagged as possibly exaggerated due to trauma. The idea that a P-47 could outclimb a Bf-109 seemed impossible. But similar reports were flooding into Luftwaffe Fighter Command from across the Western Front. On April 17, 2.JG-26 lost 4 FW-190s to P-47s without scoring a single victory. On April 22, I.JG-1 encountered P-47s escorting bombers and lost 6 aircraft while shooting down only 1 American fighter. Major Gerhard Schopfel, Geschwader Commodore of JG-26 with 45 victories, compiled the first comprehensive tactical analysis of the P-47 on May 1, 1943. His report to Fighter Command contained warnings that would prove prophetic. The P-47 is not a fighter in the conventional sense. It is a weapons platform designed around a different tactical philosophy. Its weight, which we assumed was a weakness, is actually a carefully calculated feature. The P-47's combat method: maintain speed and altitude, use dive attacks only, never attempt to turn with opponents. After attack, zoom climb back to altitude using superior engine power. With two-man element tactics, finger four formation, they cover each other perfectly. Our pilots cannot use their traditional skills against this aircraft. Maneuverability is irrelevant when the enemy refuses to maneuver. We are samurai fighting machine guns. The report landed on Adolf Galan's desk on May 3, 1943. He read it twice, then called Schopfel personally. "Gerhard, are you certain about this assessment? You're saying our fighters are obsolete?" "Not obsolete, Herr General. Outmatched. There's a difference. We can still win, but only with perfect tactics, numerical superiority, and experienced pilots. The Americans don't need any of that. They just need altitude and patience."
June 13, 1943. Jagdgeschwader 2 Operations Room, Beaumont-le-Roger, France. Major Egon Meyer, Geschwader Commodore of JG-2 and the innovator of head-on attacks against American bombers, stood before a tactical map
covered with red pins, each representing a Luftwaffe loss to P-47s in the past month. 73 fighters, he said quietly to his assembled Staffel leaders. We've lost 73 fighters in 31 days. Our victories against P-47s? 16. Gentlemen, we are losing 4.5 aircraft for every one we destroy. This is unsustainable. The officers in the room, experienced pilots all, with victory totals ranging from 20 to 60, sat in stunned silence. JG-2 Richthofen was an elite unit, one of the most decorated fighter wings in the Luftwaffe. They had fought in the Battle of France, the Battle of Britain, and over the Eastern Front. They were not accustomed to losing. Hauptmann Kurt Bühligen, a 40 victory ace, spoke up. The problem is not skill, Herr Major, it's mathematics. The P-47 has turned air combat into a mathematical equation, and the numbers favor them. Meyer nodded. Explain for the newer pilots. Bühligen stood, walking to the tactical board. Traditional fighter combat, what we've practiced and perfected for 4 years, assumes both sides will engage in maneuvering combat, dogfighting. The superior pilot wins, but the Americans have eliminated maneuvering from the equation. He drew a diagram showing altitude layers. The P-47 operates between 6,000 and 9,000 meters. At these altitudes, their turbo supercharger gives them full engine power. Our engines are producing perhaps 70% of rated power. When we climb to engage them, we're already at a disadvantage. Their tactic is simple: maintain altitude and speed. When they see an opportunity, they dive, fire, and zoom climb back to altitude. Our only chance to shoot them is during their dive attack, perhaps 3 seconds when they're in range and positioned ahead of us. If we miss that window, they're gone. Oberleutnant Franz Hrdlicka, who had survived 2 encounters with P-47s, added his testimony. I put 47 rounds of 20 millimeters into one P-47 last week. I saw the shells exploding on his engine cowling, his wings, his fuselage. He flew home to England. Our intelligence photos confirmed he landed safely. The armor and redundancy in that aircraft is beyond anything we've encountered. What the Germans were slowly, painfully learning was that the P-47's weight, the feature they had mocked, was actually its greatest weapon. The aircraft had been designed by Republic Aviation's Alexander Kartveli around a revolutionary concept: survivability over agility. Every pound of that 7,900 kilogram weight served a purpose: structural strength. The airframe could withstand forces up to 12 Gs, far beyond what a human pilot could survive. German fighters were stressed to 8 Gs. In high-speed dives, the P-47 was essentially indestructible, while Bf-109s and FW-190s risked structural failure. Armor protection. 95 kilograms of armor plate surrounded the pilot in a protective cocoon. The windscreen was 38mm bulletproof glass. Even the oil cooler had armor protection. German pilots aimed for cockpit shots, their standard killing technique, only to watch their bullets spark harmlessly off the armor. Self-sealing fuel tanks. All 8 fuel tanks used a self-sealing liner that would close around bullet holes within seconds. FW-190 and Bf-109 fuel tanks, especially the externally mounted ones, would leak and burn when hit. Redundant systems. Dual magnetos, auxiliary fuel pumps, backup hydraulic systems. A P-47 could lose half its systems and still fly home. Massive engine. The R-2800 wasn't just powerful, it was reliable and damage-resistant. The 18 cylinders meant that losing several to battle damage barely affected performance. German inline engines, with their liquid cooling systems, would overheat and seize if a single coolant line was hit. Hauptmann Herbert Huppertz of 3/JG2 described shooting down his first P-47 in a report dated June 19, 1943. I achieved position 50 meters directly behind the P-47. Perfect deflection, perfect range. I fired 180 rounds of 20 millimeter and 400 rounds of 13 millimeter in a 5-second burst. I observed at least 30 strikes on the aircraft. The pilot appeared to be hit, the aircraft shuddered, and began smoking from the engine. I was certain of a kill and broke off to engage another target. 10 minutes later, I saw the same P-47, identified by unique nose art, still flying, apparently heading home. I could not believe it. What aircraft can survive 30 cannon strikes? Post-war records confirmed that the P-47 in question, flown by Captain Robert S. Johnson of the 61st Fighter Squadron, made it back to England with 21 20mm cannon shell hits and numerous machine gun strikes. The aircraft was repaired and back in service within 72 hours. The firepower equation. The second shock for Luftwaffe pilots was the sheer volume of fire the P-47 could deliver. 8 M2 Browning .50 caliber machine guns with 425 rounds per gun, 3,400 total, created a cone of fire that was nearly impossible to evade. Lieutenant Heinz Nock, who would eventually reach 33 victories before being shot down by P-47s in 1944, analyzed the ballistics in his diary. The American .50 caliber is a revelation. We dismissed it as inferior to our 20mm cannon, less explosive power per hit. But they compensate with volume. A single P-47 fires 6,400 rounds per minute from 8 guns. Our FW-190 with 4 20mm cannons fires perhaps 400 rounds per minute total. In a 2-second burst, the P-47 puts 213 rounds into the air. We fire 13. Their probability of hitting is 16 times higher than ours. And while individual .50 caliber rounds may not explode like 20mm, 30 or 40 hits will destroy any aircraft. The lethality of this massed firepower became evident in combat film analysis. Luftwaffe intelligence officers reviewing gun camera footage from P-47s, captured from downed aircraft or recovered from crash sites, were stunned by the destructive effect. German fighters hit by P-47 fire didn't just catch fire or smoke, they disintegrated. Wings separated, fuselages broke apart, engines exploded. Major Gunther Specht, analyzing combat footage at Fighter Command Headquarters, noted in his report, "The structural damage inflicted by concentrated .50 caliber fire exceeds that of our 20mm. The kinetic energy of 40 or 50 heavy bullets striking within seconds causes catastrophic structural failure. Our pilots are not being shot down, they're being torn apart."
The Escort Revolution, August 17, 1943. The true strategic impact of the P-47 crystallized on August 17, 1943, during the Schweinfurt-Regensburg raids. The USAAF launched 376 B-17 Flying Fortresses in a deep penetration raid against German ball-bearing and aircraft factories. Luftwaffe Fighter Command threw everything available at the bombers, over 300 fighters from JG-1, JG-2, JG-11, JG-26, JG-27, and others. It would be the Luftwaffe's greatest test and the revelation of their new reality. For the first portion of the mission, P-47s provided escort. Luftwaffe fighters, attempting to reach the bombers, found themselves engaged by Thunderbolts at every altitude. The Germans tried every tactic they had developed. Diving attacks from high altitude, P-47s simply climbed with them, matching or exceeding their dive speed. Head-on attacks. The P-47's 8 guns created a wall of fire that made this suicide. Attacks from below. P-47s rolled and dove, using their superior dive performance to catch the Germans. Mass formations. The P-47's .5 calibers had effective range of 800 meters, twice the range of German 20mm cannons. Americans opened fire at distances where Germans couldn't shoot back. Hauptmann Heinz Knock, flying with JG-11, described the engagement in his diary. We attacked in Staffel strength, 12 FW-190s against perhaps 30 P-47s. We achieved good position, altitude advantage, sun behind us. By all tactical doctrine, we should have devastated them. They didn't scatter. They didn't panic. They simply turned toward us, all of them, simultaneously, and climbed. 30 P-47s in perfect formation, climbing directly at us. The combined firepower of 240 machine guns opening at 700 meters. We broke. I am not ashamed to admit it. To continue would have been not courage, but suicide. Of our Staffel, 2 aircraft were shot down in that initial exchange. We destroyed 0 P-47s. When the P-47s reached their fuel limit and turned back, the Luftwaffe fell upon the unescorted bombers with savage effectiveness. 60 B-17s were shot down that day, but the lesson was clear. Where P-47s escorted, German fighters could not effectively attack. General Major Adolf Galland, summarizing the day's action for Goering, wrote, "The P-47 has given the Americans what they needed most, the ability to protect their bombers deep into Germany. Unless we develop an answer to this aircraft, the daylight bombing campaign will succeed." The pilot crisis. By autumn 1943, the Luftwaffe faced a crisis that no amount of tactical innovation could solve: pilot attrition. The Luftwaffe training system, already strained by the demands of a multi-front war, was collapsing under losses. Pre-war Luftwaffe pilot training had been comprehensive: 240 hours minimum flight time, including aerobatics, instrument flying, gunnery, and tactical formation work. Pilots arrived at combat units with solid skills. By late 1943, new pilots were arriving at Western Front units with 160 hours total time and minimal gunnery training. Fuel shortages meant advanced training was being cut. The Eastern Front was draining away experienced instructors. Most critically, new pilots were facing American pilots who had 400-plus hours of training, including extensive combat simulation. Oberst Johannes Mackie Steinhoff, an ace with 176 victories, described the crisis in his post-war memoir. In 1940, we sent pilots to combat with 240 hours and expected them to survive their first 50 missions while gaining experience. By 1943, we were sending pilots with 160 hours, and they died in their first 10 missions, often their first encounter with P-47s. The Americans could afford to lose pilots and aircraft. Their training schools graduated thousands. Their factories produced hundreds of aircraft monthly. We could afford nothing. Every pilot lost was irreplaceable. Every aircraft lost meant 3 weeks of production. We were bleeding to death in a war of attrition we could never win. The kill ratio told the story. In 1940-41, experienced Luftwaffe pilots in Bf-109Es achieved 5-to-1 or better kill ratios against RAF fighters. By mid-1943, against P-47s, the ratio had reversed. German fighters were losing 2-to-1. By early 1944, it would reach 3-to-1 or worse.
February 20th, 1944. Luftwaffe Fighter Command Headquarters, Berlin-Wannsee. General Major Adolf Galland reviewed the casualty reports from what the Americans were calling Big Week, 6 days of maximum effort bomber raids targeting German aircraft production. The numbers before him represented the death of the Luftwaffe fighter arm as an effective force. In 6 days, German fighter losses: 355 aircraft destroyed, 233 damaged beyond immediate repair. Pilot casualties: 135 dead, 88 wounded, 27 missing. American losses: 226 heavy bombers, 28 P-47s. The trade ratio: 16 German fighters lost for every American fighter, was catastrophic. But more devastating was the psychological impact captured in the combat reports flooding his desk. Major Anton Haeckel, a 192 victory ace commanding III of JG-11, wrote in his after-action report for February 20th, "Morning mission, intercepted 250-plus B-17s with P-47 escort. We had altitude advantage, numerical advantage, 48 FW-190s versus approximately 40 P-47s. We could not press home attacks against the bombers. Every attempt was met by diving P-47s that forced us defensive. The P-47 pilots show no fear. They attack in pairs, one high and one low, with absolute coordination. Their radio discipline is perfect. They call targets to each other continuously. When we damage one, his wingman covers him until he can escape. Afternoon mission, same target area. I watched Hauptmann Schmidt, 32 victories, Iron Cross First Class, shot down by a P-47 he never saw. The American came from the sun, fired a 3-second burst from 400 meters, and Schmidt's FW-190 simply exploded. By the time I could react, the P-47 was already climbing away. I must report honestly, my pilots are beginning to fear the P-47. This is not cowardice, it is recognition of reality. We are fighter pilots in obsolete tactics facing a system we cannot defeat. The Thunderbolt unleashed, March-April 1944. By spring 1944, P-47s were operating with droppable external fuel tanks that extended their range to 1,800 kilometers, deep into Germany. No part of the Reich was safe from American fighters. More critically, P-47 units had refined their tactics into a methodology that left German fighters with no good options. The fighter sweep. P-47s would fly ahead of bomber streams at high altitude, clearing the sky of German fighters before the bombers arrived. Luftwaffe pilots attempting to position for bomber attacks found themselves engaged by Thunderbolts 100 kilometers from the bomber force. The bounce and zoom. P-47s patrolling at 8,000 to 9,000 meters would dive on German formations, make a single high-speed pass, and then zoom climb back to altitude. German fighters couldn't follow the climb and couldn't escape the dive. The layered defense. Multiple P-47 groups would escort bombers at different altitudes, one at bombing altitude, 6,000 to 7,000 meters, one high cover, 8,000 to 9,000 meters, and one free-ranging group hunting for German fighters. Any German fighter who engaged at any altitude would find P-47s above him. Oberlieutenant Heinz Knoke, now with 28 victories, described the impossibility of the tactical situation in his diary entry for March 6, 1944. Briefing at 0700. Target, B-17 formation bombing Frankfurt. Intelligence estimates 300 bombers, 150 fighters, most of them P-47s. We scramble 32 fighters from JG-11. We are to intercept before the target.
We climb to 7,500 meters, position ourselves ahead of the bomber stream. Above us, perhaps 3,000 meters higher, I can see the contrails of P-47s, 40 of them at least, flying racetrack patterns above the bombers. We dive to attack. Immediately, the P-47s above dive on us. They have speed advantage from their altitude. They have position. They have numbers. We must break off our attack run to defend ourselves. We engage for perhaps 90 seconds. 4 of our fighters are shot down. We claim 1 P-47 damaged. The survivors break away and climb back to altitude. We try again. Same result. After 3 attempts, we're low on fuel and ammunition. The bombers, untouched, continue to Frankfurt and destroy their target. We return to base having achieved nothing except losing 6 pilots. D-Day and the Normandy collapse, June 6, 1944. The Allied invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944 represented the Luftwaffe's complete inability to contest air superiority. On D-Day itself, the Luftwaffe flew exactly 319 sorties over the invasion beaches. The Allies flew 14,674. P-47s, operating from forward airfields in England and then from temporary strips in France, created an impenetrable umbrella over Allied ground forces. Any German aircraft that appeared was immediately engaged by multiple Thunderbolts. Oberst Josef Pips Priller,
a 101 Victory Ace commanding JG-26, made one of the few Luftwaffe attacks on D-Day, a two-aircraft strafing run on Sword Beach, which achieved nothing. His after-action report captured the futility. We took off at first light, myself and Feldweichik Wodarczyk, only 2 aircraft serviceable. We came in low over the invasion fleet, hundreds of ships, thousands of vessels. We strafed the beach and turned for home. Within seconds, we were engaged by 8 P-47s. How they found us so quickly, I don't know. They must have been vectored by radar. Wodarczyk was hit immediately. His FW-190 exploded in the air. I survived only by flying at wave-top height where the P-47s couldn't get good firing angles. I landed with 47 hits on my aircraft. Wodarczyk was 24 years old. He never had a chance. By late June, the Luftwaffe had abandoned daylight operations over Normandy. P-47s ruled the skies so completely that German ground forces moved only at night.
The strafing terror, ground attack dominance. While the P-47's air-to-air prowess was devastating, its ground attack capability was equally terrifying for German forces. Loaded with 8 50-caliber guns, rockets, and bombs, the P-47 became the most feared ground attack aircraft on the Western Front. The armored engine and structure that made it nearly immune to fighter fire also made it largely immune to ground fire. German flak units found that anything short of direct hits from 88mm guns wouldn't stop a P-47. Obergefreiter Klaus Becker, serving with a panzer division in France, recorded his experience in a letter home, intercepted by Allied intelligence. The Jabos, fighter bombers, come every day. American P-47s. We call them Thunderbolts of terror. They fly low, impossibly low, and the sound is terrifying, like thunder, which is why they earned their name. Our flak shoots and shoots. We see hits, but they don't go down. They just keep coming, firing those 8 machine guns. The sound is like ripping cloth, but amplified 1,000 times. When they fire rockets, tanks explode. Yesterday they caught our column on the road. 20 minutes, that's all it took. 37 vehicles destroyed, over 100 men killed. We shot down 1 P-47, and the pilot parachuted safely and was captured. He was laughing. He says his aircraft took 63 hits, but all the systems still worked. How do you fight that? Post-war analysis credited P-47s with destroying 9,000 locomotives, 86,000 railway cars, 68,000 trucks, 6,000 armored vehicles, countless bridges, fuel dumps, and supply columns. The P-47's ground attack success rate was unprecedented. 1 aircraft lost for every 66 ground attack sorties. The psychological collapse. Thunderbolt psychosis. By summer 1944, Luftwaffe medical officers were reporting a new phenomenon they termed Jäger-Koller, fighter madness, specifically related to P-47 encounters. Pilots who had survived multiple engagements with Thunderbolts exhibited symptoms similar to shell shock, hypervigilance, inability to sleep, panic responses to aircraft silhouettes, and, most critically, reluctance to engage when P-47s were present. Stabsarzt Dr. Wolfgang Miller, stationed at Jagdbeschwander III's medical facility, wrote in a report to Luftwaffe Medical Command. The psychological profile of these pilots is distinct from general combat fatigue. They do not fear combat in general. Many have 30-plus missions and multiple victories. They fear the P-47 specifically. Common statements: you can't hurt them. They're always above you. You never see the one that kills you. It's not fighting, it's execution. Several pilots have refused to fly when intelligence reports indicate heavy P-47 presence. Under normal circumstances, this would be cowardice. In these cases, it appears to be a rational response to impossible odds. Major Gerhard Barkhorn, one of the highest-scoring aces with 301 victories, all on the Eastern Front, transferred to a Western Front unit in August 1944. After one mission against P-47 escorted bombers, he requested immediate transfer back to the East. His reasoning, preserved in unit records, was stark. On the Russian front, skill matters. I can use my experience, my tactics, my aircraft's capabilities to achieve victories. Here, nothing matters except luck. The P-47 negates skill. It negates experience. I survived today not because I'm skilled, but because an American pilot happened to miss. Tomorrow, he won't. I choose to fight where my skills have value.
December 16, 1944. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Hitler's desperate gamble to split Allied forces and capture Antwerp began under heavy overcast that grounded Allied air power. For 3 days, German ground forces made significant progress, while American aircraft, including P-47s, sat helplessly on rain-soaked airfields. On December 23, the weather cleared. Oberst Meinrad von Laukert, commanding the 2nd Panzer Division, described what happened next in his post-war interrogation. December 23 began with clear skies, what we called Jabo-Wetter, or fighter-bomber weather, with dread. By 0900, we heard them, the distinctive rumble of R-2800 engines, P-47s. They came in waves. First wave hit our lead elements with rockets and bombs. Second wave strafed our supply column. Third wave destroyed our fuel trucks. By 1300, the division was combat ineffective, not from ground combat, but from air attack. We lost 81 tanks and assault guns that day. Not to American ground forces, to P-47s. Our division was essentially destroyed in 6 hours. Other divisions reported similar losses. The offensive was over. The P-47s ended it. The Ardennes battle marked the P-47's apotheosis as a ground attack aircraft. In the 2 weeks of clear weather following December 23, P-47 groups flew over 12,000 sorties, destroying an estimated 900 armored vehicles, 5,000 trucks, and 500 locomotives. German commanders later testified that the offensive failed primarily due to air attack, not ground resistance. The final battles, January-May 1945. By early 1945, the Luftwaffe had ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. Fuel shortages meant that even serviceable aircraft sat grounded. Experienced pilots were dead or grounded by wounds. New pilots with 30 to 40 hours total flight time were sent into combat and usually died on their first mission. P-47 pilots were achieving scores once reserved for the great aces. Captain Robert S. Johnson of the 61st Fighter Squadron finished the war with 27 victories. Colonel Francis S. Gabby Gabreski reached 28, plus 6.5 MiG-15s in Korea, making him a dual-war ace. Colonel Hubert Zemke, commanding the 56th Fighter Group, built the unit into the highest-scoring P-47 group, 674 air victories and over 300 ground kills. The 56th Fighter Group's tactics manual, captured by German intelligence in March 1945, was translated and distributed to Luftwaffe units as an example of American systematic approach to air combat. Reading it, German pilots understood the full extent of the gap. Energy fighting doctrine: never turn with the enemy, maintain speed and altitude. Mutual support: never operate solo, always cover your wingman. Altitude advantage: start every engagement from above. Patience: if the tactical situation is unfavorable, break off and reset. Firepower concentration: focus multiple aircraft on single targets. Radar vectoring: trust ground controllers to position you perfectly. Oberstleutnant Gunther Lutzow, a 108 victory ace, reviewing the manual, wrote in the margin, "This is not fighter pilot thinking. This is engineering. They have engineered air combat, and we have lost."
The German post-war assessment. In June 1945, at the Air Interrogation Center at Wiesbaden, Allied intelligence officers conducted extensive debriefings of captured Luftwaffe leaders. The transcripts revealed the Germans' belated recognition of the P-47's revolutionary design. General-Major Adolf Galland, the general of fighters with 104 confirmed victories, gave perhaps the most comprehensive assessment. We underestimated the P-47 in every way that mattered. We saw weight and assumed sluggishness. We saw radial engine and assumed vulnerability. We saw American design and assumed inefficiency. The truth? The P-47 was the first fighter designed as a complete weapon system, not as an aircraft for virtuoso pilots. Its weight was structural strength. Its engine was reliability and power. Its design was survivability and lethality. Our Bf-109 and FW-190 were beautiful aircraft for skilled pilots. The P-47 was a brutal weapon for average pilots. In war, the brutal weapon that any pilot can use effectively beats the beautiful weapon that requires mastery. If I could rewrite history, I would have told the RLM in 1943, copy the P-47, exactly. Don't improve it, don't lighten it, don't make it more maneuverable, just copy it. We would have been 2 years behind, but we would have had an aircraft that could compete. Instead, we built beautiful fighters that died beautifully. Major General Johannes Steinhoff, the 176 Victory Ace, who had initially dismissed the P-47 as a truck, was even more blunt. The P-47 killed the Luftwaffe. Not the strategic bombing, not the numerical superiority, not the oil campaign. The Thunderbolt. By late 1944, our pilots would rather face 4 P-51s than 2 P-47s. The P-51 was faster, more agile, easier to combat. The P-47 was relentless. You couldn't shake it, you couldn't damage it, and if it got you in its sights, you were dead. The most terrifying sound of the war wasn't the air raid siren or the artillery barrage. It was the R-2800 engine's rumble at high altitude, because you knew the P-47s were up there, and they would come down, and there was nothing you could do.
The technical revelation. When German engineers examined captured intact P-47s after the war, they discovered the genius in details they had dismissed. The R-2800 engine, 18 cylinders providing redundancy. If 3 cylinders were destroyed, the engine still produced 89% power. German DB605 liquid-cooled engines would fail completely if a single coolant line was severed. The turbo supercharger gave full power to 9,000+ meters where German fighters struggled. The complexity German engineers had mocked as American over-engineering was actually sophisticated mechanical design that worked flawlessly. The armor layout, not just steel plates but shaped armor that deflected shots rather than just absorbing them. The cockpit was a protective bathtub that could stop 20mm shells. The self-sealing tanks used multiple layers of rubber compounds that expanded when punctured by fuel, sealing holes within 60 seconds. German tanks used single-layer systems that often failed. The electrical system, completely redundant with backup generators, backup batteries, and isolated circuits. German aircraft electrical systems were single failure point designs. Professor Kurt Tank, designer of the FW-190, examined a P-47D thoroughly at Wright Field after the war. His comment recorded in a technical report. This is not an aircraft. It is a flying tank designed to survive hits that would destroy any German fighter. We design for performance. They design for survival. In retrospect, survival is more important. A surviving pilot learns and improves. A dead pilot, no matter how skilled, cannot fight the next battle.
The strategic impact. Beyond tactical victories, the P-47 achieved strategic effects that changed the war. 1. Bomber escort. Made deep penetration daylight bombing possible, destroying German industrial capacity. 2. Air superiority. By mid-1944,
The Luftwaffe could not contest airspace anywhere P-47s operated, giving Allied ground forces free movement. 3. Interdiction. Destroyed German logistics networks, making supply of frontline units nearly impossible. 4. Psychological dominance. German ground and air forces knew they had no answer to the P-47, which degraded combat effectiveness even when P-47s weren't present. 5. Pilot preservation. Low loss rates meant experienced American pilots accumulated hundreds of missions, creating a veteran force that only became more lethal over time. German pilot experience decreased over time due to attrition. The final accounting, May 8, 1945. On VE Day, May 8, 1945, P-47 groups across Europe flew victory patrols. They encountered no resistance. The Luftwaffe was finished. Only 1,500 aircraft remained operational of the 40,000 plus produced during the war, and almost no trained pilots survived. Captain Robert S. Johnson, the 27 Victory Ace, whose damaged P-47 had limped home despite 21 20mm cannon hits in June 1943, reflected on the aircraft in his memoir. The P-47 saved my life at least 5 times. Hits that would have killed me in any other fighter, I flew home with. Fights I should have lost, the Jug won for me with its power and strength. It wasn't the fastest or the prettiest, but it was the toughest and most reliable. In combat, tough and reliable beats fast and pretty every time. Colonel Hubert Zemke, whose 56th Fighter Group scored 674 aerial victories, highest of any P-47 group, put it simply: give me a squadron of average pilots in P-47s over a squadron of aces in Bf-109s. The aces will perform brilliantly for a few weeks, then they'll be dead, because the law of averages is undefeated. The average pilots in Jugs will survive, learn, improve, and eventually become aces themselves. The P-47 was designed around one principle: bring the pilot home. Everything else was secondary. The 1946 Luftwaffe Symposium. In March 1946, the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey conducted a detailed symposium with surviving Luftwaffe leaders at Horsching, Austria. The transcript of the P-47 discussion reveals the full extent of German recognition. Interrogator: when did you realize the P-47 would defeat the Luftwaffe fighter arm? General Mayor Galland: honestly, June 1943. After 2 months of operations. The kill ratios were clear, but I couldn't convince high command. They believed superior pilot skill would prevail. By September 1943, it was statistically certain we would lose the air war. By January 1944, it was mathematically impossible for us to win. Interrogator: what would you have needed to counter the P-47? Oberst Steinhoff: an aircraft with its capabilities. We couldn't build it. Even if we had the designs, we lacked the industrial capacity. The R-2800 engine required production tolerances we couldn't achieve. The turbo supercharger needed alloys we didn't have. The armor plate quality exceeded our manufacturing capability. And we lacked the oil to fuel such a heavy aircraft in large numbers. Interrogator: so the P-47's weight was actually an advantage? Major General Johannes Throttloft: 120 victories. Entirely. Every kilogram served a purpose: protection, power, fuel, ammunition. Our fighters were light because we had to be. We lacked resources. We called it superior design philosophy. It was actually necessity. The Americans had resources to build it right. They did. We lost.
The verdict of the vanquished. The final word comes from a captured Luftwaffe training manual, dated February 1945, distributed to the few remaining fighter pilots. The section on engaging P-47s: Tactical guidance for P-47 engagement. 1. Do not engage unless altitude advantage is 2,000 plus meters. 2. Do not engage unless numerical superiority is 3 to 1. 3. Do not attempt turning combat. 4. Do not pursue if target dives. 5. Break off engagement if target begins zoom climb. 6. Avoid engagement if low on fuel or ammunition. 7. Preferred tactic. Do not engage. Seek other targets. The manual essentially admitted that the Luftwaffe had no effective counter to the P-47. The final sentence was both pragmatic and devastating. The P-47 is a superior weapon system flown by well-trained pilots with unlimited resources. Our advantage is aggression and willingness to sacrifice. Use it. By February 1945, willingness to sacrifice was all the Luftwaffe had left. The P-47 Thunderbolt, mocked in 1943 as too heavy, too slow, too American, had systematically destroyed the once mighty Luftwaffe fighter force. The Germans had laughed, but the P-47 had crushed them, without mercy, without pause, and with mathematical certainty. In the end, weight defeated grace, system defeated skill, and the Jug, derided as a flying milk bottle, proved to be the most effective fighter bomber of the European war.